Hello, you welcome to this edition of The Inside on Equinoxe Television. We are broadcasting from Cameroon's economic capital, Douala. I am Babla Jonathan. In this edition of the program, we will be analyzing Cameroon government's recent decisions, statements, actions, and reactions on the management of the COVID-19 pandemic and the close to 4-year-long socio-political and security crisis referred to by some social critics as a full-blown civil war in Anglophone northwest and southwest regions of Cameroon. Meet our guest in some few seconds. Our guest today is joining us from Dallas, Texas, United States of America. Dr. Oscar Labang is a Cameroonian American who works for the United States Department of Homeland Security. He is the president of the Labang Foundation, a non-governmental organization which promotes education in Cameroon and works with internally displaced persons kicked out of their homes by the Anglophone crisis in the northwest and southwest regions of the country, the northern regions and other parts of the country. He took part in the major national dialogue convened by the President of the Republic of Cameroon, Paul Biya, with the aim of finding solutions to the Anglophone crisis. Dr. Oscar Labang, you're welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Babila.
All right, we are beginning today with press freedom. Before we get into the core of this edition of The Insight, today is May 3, 2020, World Press Freedom Day. And on this day, we are remembering some of us who can no longer write nor speak. Their hands have been tied, their lips sealed, their pens and microphones confiscated, arrested and detained for various reasons. Some have been in the dark for several months. One of them is Samuel Wazizi Ajeka Abui, popularly known as Samuel Wazizi, a journalist with CMTV in the southwest region of Chieftain Boya. He has been detained for more than 9 months today incommunicado since his arrest in August 2019. His whereabouts remains unknown to his lawyers, his relatives, colleagues, and friends, and he is accused of having links with separatist fighters in the northwest and southwest regions of the country, and calls for his release by several national and international journalists, associations and unions have yielded no fruit. This is just one out of many cases in the Republic of Cameroon, besides threats against journalists and media outlets, including Equinoxe media conglomerate from the Cameroon government, authorities, and unknown sources. And is Samuel Wazizi alive? Is he dead? Questions very difficult to answer today with certainty. And when we look at all this, Dr. Labang, we're tempted to ask the question, is this Cameroon's press freedom?
Well, Babila, its situation is not unique to Cameroon. Journalists in Cameroon, journalists in Africa, journalists all over the world are under such an attack that we have never witnessed in history, the history of journalism. On such a day, press freedom, we just have to continue to put pressure on the various stakeholders who continue to limit freedom of expression, who continue to limit freedom of speech. And it is important to note that your job as a journalist has never been harder than it is now, because we are living in an age where everybody assumes that they have information and they have the right information. And so journalistic reporting, investigative reporting is constantly being attacked. Journalists are constantly being attacked for telling the truth or for investigating and revealing facts. So we just have to continue to put the pressure. We just have to continue to advocate. We just have to continue to educate on the necessity for the freedom of the press, because it is a very, very vital organ, but especially in a democracy.
The question some of us are asking today is, has journalism become a crime in a country like Cameroon?
The answer lies in between what we would consider a crime and what we would consider journalism. Now, we have to be very clear. There are the standards which journalists must adhere to. If a journalist adheres to those standards and that journalist is attacked, that is unacceptable. But then we have to be conscious. Now, journalism is not a crime, and journalism should never be a crime. The situation in Cameroon is a little bit more complicated because individuals can do their whims and caprices at any time under the cover of being a government authority or being a figure in the administration. Sometimes we have to recognize that all the acts against journalists are not necessarily sanctioned by the government. But there are individuals everywhere. It happens everywhere. Even the individuals do not need to be in the government. We have stories of journalists being attacked by individuals who are not in the government in other parts of the world. We have individuals and organizations that are against journalists just because the journalists report information that they think is not in line with their own ideology. But tolerance is the key, and respect for each individual's freedom of expression and the journalist's freedom to exercise and practice his profession without fear, without intimidation, and of course without favor is key to understanding these issues.
And what seems a little difficult to understand is why journalists should be detained incommunicado and sometimes arrested arbitrarily. I cited the case of Samuel Wazizi here in Cameroon, journalist with CMTV in Boya, who has been detained for over 9 months today, incommunicado. His lawyers, relatives, colleagues, and friends know nothing about his whereabouts. It is not known whether he is still alive or he is dead. What is happening to him? Very difficult to know.
Yes, such an instance, Babila, I think his case is very, very unique, but it transcends the fact that he is a journalist. No individual, whether a journalist, a student, a teacher, no individual should be held incommunicado. Under no circumstance should an individual ever be held in that situation. It goes beyond him being a journalist. It transcends that to the realm of human rights violations, because he has a right to legal counsel. He has a right to legal representation. He has a right to communicate with his family, even if he is in jail or awaiting trial, whatever the situation, his situation could be. So under no circumstance should an individual be held incommunicado. Under no circumstance should an individual be denied the right to legal representation. That is a gross violation of his right, first as a human being, and then as a journalist. And probably because he reported on an incident or he investigated an incident which is perceived from another perspective. So it is important that we continue, as I said at the beginning, to push this information, continue to pressure the authorities to understand that even if he committed a crime, he has a right to legal representation. He has a right to communicate with his family.
Now, what are some of the risks that a nation like Cameroon could possibly be exposed to when such things happen, when the press is not totally free, when the press is muzzled to an extent by the authorities?
Now, when the point is, once the press, like you say, is cornered to a point where they cannot freely report information, the public becomes distrustful of the administration. And the reason is simple. Journalists are supposed to serve as a voice of the public, especially in its check on power. So once journalists get under attack, the population becomes distrustful of the administration because they start assuming that there is something that somebody wants to hide. So, in as much as we continue to pressure for press freedom, for the liberty, the freedom of the journalists to investigate facts, investigate incidents, and report objectively, it is important that we let the administration know that journalists are not just a check, but they are the eyes of the public on the administration.
And journalists are threatened practically on a daily basis. Media organs threatened. Recently, it was the Minister of Territorial Administration of Cameroon, Atanganji Paul, who threatened to shut down Equinoxe television and radio and some other media outlets, including Balafon Radio, STV, and Le Jour newspaper, for reporting facts on the Anglophone crisis. When you hear such threats, which later were proven to be out of place because the findings of the Commission on Inquiry on the Ngarbu incident, for example, proved that the media organs, notably Equinoxe, has been reporting nothing but the facts, but the truth. When you listen to such threats, what do you think about the authorities and the press?
No, it's a very delicate situation there. Now, when government authorities start threatening to shut down entire media houses because of specific reports or because of reports on specific incidents, it breeds the distrust that I have talked about earlier. Now, the minister might, let us assume that the minister has a basis for any necessary action against a media house. Does threatening that media house address that issue? It doesn't. There should be a more professional manner of approaching an incident like that. There should be a more, the minister should know. And beyond that, is it the Minister of Territorial Administration that has jurisdiction over media houses? That's a key question we have to ask. There's a Ministry of Communication, there's a Ministry of Telecommunication, there's a National Communication Agency, and all those organs and institutions. Why not channel your complaint through those organs? Have them investigate. If they want to investigate Equinoxe, it's not a problem. Let them investigate and see if the Equinoxe is reporting something contrary to the facts. If they have evidence that Equinoxe is reporting something contrary to the facts, then you can now make a case against Equinoxe. Just threatening the institution or threatening the journalists that are simply doing their job is not correct.
Right.
Just threatening the institution because the institution is reporting on issues that an individual does not like is not acceptable. And it's not something that the Cameroon government as a whole should tolerate.
Right, Dr. Laban, let's now talk about the fight against the coronavirus pandemic in Cameroon, Africa, and the world. Starting from where you are in Dallas, Texas, United States of America, what's the situation there?
I would say that it continues to spike. The number of cases continue to increase. I think yesterday, our county reported, I think, the highest number of positive cases since the pandemic hit the United States. So that's an indication that the numbers continue to grow, both especially in our county, in our area. Internationally, there are signs of progress. In other parts of the United States, some states are already reporting that they've been able to flatten the curve, and they should start working on a decline. So that is positive news overall. But looking at the general case of the United States, it's been really, really devastating. More than 60,000 people are dead already, and the situation is not yet under control. But like I said, in places where the curve is beginning to flatten, it's a good sign that things are getting under control.
And most of the dead victims in the United States, as in the United Kingdom, are blacks. Where you are, what information are you receiving from your fellow Cameroonians, your fellow Africans? What's the situation as far as this health challenge is concerned?
It's really, really complex, especially like you said, looking at the data that is available so far. It doesn't look very friendly, especially from the point that more blacks are dying than other ethnicities. But the general idea which is available based on the data is the fact that a lot more black people suffer from underlying health problems. Others have looked at it from the perspective of racism, discrimination, health, but I'd rather stick with the health data that is available from the CDC and from other state government or government organizations, because as you know, underlying health conditions are a key to contributing to deaths when it comes to COVID-19.
All right, Dr. Oscar Labang, let's come back to your home country, to your country of birth, Cameroon. The situation here has been worsening by the day, and the government authorities have decided to lift some of the restrictions that were imposed to prevent the spread of COVID-19, notably restrictions on the functioning of beer parlors and some entertainment sites, and transporters who were expected to transport a limited number of persons in their vehicles on the commercial motorbikes and so on. The government has decided to lift these restrictions in order to mitigate the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, and now beer parlors and other entertainment sites will function beyond 6 p.m. on grounds that, or on the instructions that they have to respect all the sanitation and preventive measures against COVID-19. Before you comment on that, let's take a listen to this reaction of one of your compatriots, your fellow compatriots there in the United States of America, a medical expert, Dr. Ivor Dita, Assistant Professor of Medicine at the University of Minnesota Medical School. Take a listen to this.
Certainly not neglect the socio-economic impact of the coronavirus on the population as a whole. At the same time, we must remember that we can always rebuild the economy but we can never revive lives. This is the reason why I think governments around the world are taking very slow and deliberate steps to see how they can reopen in a way that is safe and protects human life. If we look back into history, we can quickly remember the story that occurred in 1720 in the city of Marseille in France, where a ship that was inflicted by a plague had been quarantined for quite some time, and then subsequently, because of the valuable goods that were on this ship, the leadership of the city decided to bring the ship on board. And Marseille ended up losing about 100,000 of its citizens. And that at the time, that represented about half of the population of Marseille. So again, the government needs to certainly weigh and balance how we reopen the economy while protecting human life. We have seen videos circulating since the government have lifted some of the measures that were put in place in order to curb the progression of the virus. Again, if you look at it very well, if there was only one thing we could do to curb down the spread and progression of the COVID-19, it would be social distancing. So you ask yourself the question, how can people social distance in a bar? That's probably not possible. And if we go by the videos that we saw circulating, we saw people celebrating, they didn't have any face masks, and they were as close to each other as if we were in a supermarket before COVID-19. So that's certainly very concerning, and I think the government should be very worried that perhaps the slow progression that we had seen in Cameroon may be put in jeopardy with this kind of measures. We also look at transport sector, where taxi driver is overloading, carrying more than the expected number in their taxis. I mean, how can you social distance in a taxi as such? It's practically very difficult. So if you go back to the off licenses, we could argue that the government could have started progressively by extending the hours during which the off license will be open, such that people can who leave work late can come in, get their drinks, go home, and have a good time with their families. But to say they will come and drink in this off license is probably, in my opinion, not the best way to go about uplifting these measures. Again, we can always rebuild the economy, but we can never revive dead people. These decisions being made by the government must be balanced and must weigh the impact when it comes to human life as well as the economy to ensure that we are not making
Dr. Ivo Jita, a Cameroonian medical expert in the United States of America, assistant professor of medicine at the University of Minnesota Medical School. Dr. Laban Oscar, what do you think about this decision by government to lift some of the anti-COVID-19 restrictions?
Yeah, let me start saying I agree with a lot of what Dr. Chita said. It is important. One key thing which he emphasized is the fact that we can always revive and rebuild the economy, but we cannot revive or rebuild our people who will be dead if that becomes the situation. Now, so in terms of the measures, but it is important that we recognize that it's not only the government of Cameroon that is dealing with these challenges. The various states, the various governors of the various states in the United States are are locked in the same dilemma. What do we do? How do we open the economy? There are cities where the mayors have just said, well, we are opening, we don't care. Nothing is going to happen. And they've opened everything at that. I can imagine how they got to that point. But let us look at the situation of Cameroon, which you're talking about. The first thing which I would want to mention is the fact that the Prime Minister who's heading the pandemic response is working based on information and data that is available to him. That information and data, you and I might not be privy to that information and data. So we might not know exactly what is guiding his decision process. That aside, let us take the example of the bars he talked about. The first thing is that those bars should have been closed all day since day one. It is not a question of 6 p.m. and beyond. Social distancing is not about time. It is about social distancing. It is about staying apart. So from the very beginning, bars and pub licenses were supposed to have been closed completely. Because if people congregate at a bar at 4 p.m., it doesn't change the fact that there's no social distancing if they congregate in a classic bar at 7 p.m. So, in terms of both from the perspective of places like bars, to me, it is not about the timing. It is about the action and the measures that are taken. Now, the assumption that the reaction I get from most people makes it seem as if after 6 p.m., people will no longer respect social distancing. They will only respect it before 6 p.m.
No,
the simple fact is,
Doctor,
are opening from
Dr. Labang, you know, the issue here is that during the day, there are generally few persons found in bars and entertainment sites and so on. People are more busy with their work and so on. And then in the evening, as from 6 p.m., that is when there is the population in the bars and entertainment sites are increasing and so on. But the government has decided to lift this restriction. Is the risk, what's the probability of having something like what happened in Marseille in France in 1720, when almost half of the population died? Is it not a risky decision at this point in time?
Well, like I said, my assumption is that the Prime Minister and his team, they've done a cost-benefit analysis on these measures, and they, for now, think that something like a bar can go operational. Let us be clear. The issue is about social distancing. And what can happen is this. The government can preach all it wants about social distancing. It is the individual responsibility of each citizen to respect the measure to create social distancing. I don't think the government of any country, anywhere in the world, has sufficient law enforcement that can compel everybody to social distance. Here in the United States, there are people who are still disobeying the social distancing rules.
So there's an issue of individual responsibility, and the
individual responsibility is central. This is now. Let us look at this situation this way. If I refuse that I am not going to obey the social distancing rule, or if I decide to leave work, if I'm in Cameroon, and go to the bar at 6 p.m. or at 7 p.m., and then I contaminate COVID-19 from the bar, guess who is going to suffer first? Me, my wife, my children, and whoever lives in my household. It is not the Prime Minister, it is not the Minister of Health, it is not a government official. So accountability is key because this is a health situation. If you value your health, you should be the one telling others, hey, you are not supposed to do this. It is wrong.
Right.
So if we take our collective responsibility as individuals, then we can now say, okay, government, we are taking our collective responsibility. What can you do to improve the conditions for us?
That's why the President of the Republic of Cameroon, in one of his first statements on his Twitter page on the coronavirus pandemic, called on all Cameroonians and all persons living on the Cameroonian territory to be more responsible and disciplined at this very crucial moment. Dr. Laban, globally speaking, do you think that all the actions, measures that the Cameroon government has been taking so far, we can be moving out of these troubled waters, can take us out of these troubled waters?
I must say that the Cameroon government is doing as much as it can, but it can do better. It is important, Babylon, for me to acknowledge the seriousness with which Cameroonians are treating this pandemic. I have watched videos of individuals, of small businesses, of organizations working, creating masks out of limited resources, producing buckets, producing hand sanitizer, and doing everything they are doing at their level, both at the community level, at the individual level, at the business level, at the organizational level. It is important that we salute the effort that Cameroonians are putting individually and at the level of organizations. But at the level of the government, there is a lot that can be done, there is a lot that needs to be done. The various innovations that young Cameroonian entrepreneurs have brought up in the face of this crisis, of this pandemic, the government is supposed to capitalize on the work of these young Cameroonian entrepreneurs and ask them, how do we duplicate this? How do we improve on this? How do we make this available in the nooks and crannies of the country so that every citizen, every Cameroonian is able to fight COVID-19 at their individual and family level, even before a community level. So the Cameroon government still has a lot of work to do. And by the way, it is important to congratulate the Minister of Health, Dr. Malashki, who has been on top of the pandemic from the very beginning. Just the ability of his service to be able to track down the cases, to report the number of contaminations, to report the number of deaths, and to give the Cameroonian public daily statistics on what is going on. That is very important because once the people have data, once organizations and individuals have data on what is going on nationally, they are able to make decisions at their own individual level on how they are going to help to combat this pandemic.
All right, Dr. Laban, we are going to take a look at what the newspapers reported this week, the press review by Immaculate Fogwe.
The Guardian Post says gross marginalization as Anglophones have unjustly denied key administrative positions at the University of Yaoundé 1. The Guardian Post and Herald Tribune reports that the Minister of Territorial Administration, Paul Atanganji, has dispatched President Paul Biya's health kits worth 2 billion CFA francs to the 360 subdivisions in Cameroon. The reporter says President Paul Biya matches words with action following his dispatchment of hygiene kits worth 2 billion CFA francs. The Post. Cameroon and Madagascar leading in the quest of getting a herbal cure for COVID-19 patients. The Sun and the Star reported the demise of the mayor of Limbawan, Boarudani Mokako, saying he was infected with the coronavirus. The Advocate says all hands are on deck to fight against COVID-19 in Cameroon following the numerous COVID-19 sensitization campaigns carried out in the different regions. The median came back to the demise of the Grand Master of the Sovereign Order of Malta, saying that he was killed by an incurable disease.
Thanks, Immaculate Fogwe, for the press review, and we are still with our guest, Dr. Oscar Laban, who is in the United States of America, and joining us from Dallas, Texas. Doctor, recently the Commission of Inquiry set up by the Cameroon government to investigate the Ngarbo incident published its findings, and of course it generated a lot of talking here and there and so on, and another statement by the Minister of Communication and Government spokesperson Rene Emmanuel Sadi, who came out to say that government does not tell lies, government did not deliberately hide or thwart the facts on that incident. What do you think about government's stand on this issue, the Ngarbo massacre of February 2020 and other atrocities that have been committed in Anglophone Cameroon?
Yes, Babila, I think it is a very unfortunate situation that children, women, pregnant women, are trapped in such a gruesome massacre. We continue to express deep condolences to the families of the victims, and to push on the Cameroon government to bring to light the issues. Now, when the Minister of Communication says the government did not deliberately tell lies, I can understand, Babila, the perspective from which he makes that statement. Let me explain what I mean. In law enforcement, integrity and professionalism are key values that each individual in the law enforcement community must hold closely to. Now, when I talk about professionalism and integrity, it's particularly integrity because it is that ability to tell the truth whether somebody is watching or not. And this is the situation in which the Cameroon government found itself, from my understanding. The officers at the scene of the incident misrepresented the report. And that misrepresentation created what we call a slippery slope effect. The lie from the officer was handed over to the commander. The commander took the lie and handed it to the administration at the divisional level. The administration at the divisional level took the lie and transmitted it to the regional level. The region took the lie and transmitted it to the ministry. The ministry took the lie and transmitted it to the presidency. And then the presidency sent a spokesperson to tell that lie to the Cameroonian people. Which means that, as the Minister of Communication said, the government did not intend to lie, but the government was misled. And that is where the issue becomes serious, Babila. This is an instance where the government should let the perpetrators of the act know. The government should send a clear signal to law enforcement that it will not tolerate unprofessional behavior, It will not tolerate misrepresentation of reports. It will not tolerate lies telling, no matter how minute the incident is. Because once the officer in Donga Mantum tells a lie, that lie continues to the level of the presidency. And that is why integrity in law enforcement becomes a very valuable tool. As a law enforcement professional, you must at all instances be willing and ready to report the incident as it occurred, whether other people observed it or not.
All right, Dr. Olaban, before we continue analyzing, I want us to just go back to what the Minister of Communication of Cameroon, René Emmanuel Sadi, said. He explained how government proceeds before making a statement on issues of national interest. He explained why sometimes government takes a longer period of time than expected to make a statement. I think the government reacted about 4 days after the Ngarbu massacre in its first statement, and he also indicates that, as I said earlier, government did not deliberately intend to hide or thwart the facts, and he explains, he thinks that there is no contradiction between what the government said and what the inquiry commission said on the Ngarbu incident in particular. Let's take a listen to Minister René Emmanuel Sadi.
In Cameroon, as elsewhere, the information is collected from sources that enjoy the best presumption of reliability and is then cross-checked before being made public in order to limit as much as possible the margins of error likely to alter it. This also explains why it may take some time between the occurrence of the event and the government's reaction. This was the case with the Ngarbu events. The events, as you know, took place on the night of 13 to 14 February 2020. The government's reaction came 4 days later, the time needed to conduct the investigations required by the seriousness of the events. This means, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, that when the government speaks out on topical issues, it always does so in good faith, never with the aim of misinforming or misrepresenting the facts, but on the contrary, in order to provide the public with the right information in a transparent manner. As to the substance of the matter in relation to the Ngarbu incident, the government began by recalling the context in which the military operations was undertaken. In this respect, moreover, as you will have noticed, the views of the government and those of the Joint Commission of Inquiry converge, in that the village of Ngarbu had become a landmark, a veritable logistical base for the supply of arms, a veritable logistical base for the supply of arms, ammunition, and fuel to the secessionist armed bands. Moreover, the investigation revealed that those terrorists had carried out numerous acts of violence against the civilian population, such as cattle rustling, rape, and other assaults, what the government had also said at the time. Moreover, it should be recalled that it is in response to the appeal of the people of the locality of Ngarbu, who were literally taken hostage by the armed gangs, that the defense forces undertook a mission on the ground, during which fighting took place and leading to the death of 5 secessionist terrorists. Here again, the Joint Commission of Inquiry does not contradict what the government stated on 18 February 2020, namely that the armed gangs that were wreaking havoc in this area, sowing terror and desolation among the population, had taken refuge in a peripheral hamlet called Ngarbu to set up their rear base and reorganize the racketeering of the people while perpetrating unspeakable abuses on the road leading to Tumbo. Similarly, and at no time did the government conceal the fact that there have been civilian deaths. This is a serious, distressing, and deplorable situation for which the government, through my voice, has conveyed to the bereaved families the condolences of the President of the Republic, His Excellency Paul Biya. Only the exact number and the responsibility of the perpetrators of the human killings were deliberately concealed by the elements of our defense and security forces involved in the operation, in which they were taken by panic. Another truth that has not been denied by the Joint Commission of Inquiry, and that must be said, is that the detachment of military and gendarmes dispatched to Ngarbu was not intended to exterminate civilians or set houses on fire. In other words, it was not a combat operation, but a reconnaissance mission whose essence was unfortunately twisted. All what I have said is sufficient to indicate that it was never the intention of the government to distort the facts and attest to its good faith.
It was not the intention of the government to distort the facts, but like you were indicating earlier, Dr. Laban, the facts were distorted.
And what the minister purpose distorted and what the minister has done in that press conference is emphasize the part of the initial government report which agree with the current report. He, on the other hand, has not established what was distorted. Now, this is the situation. As he says, he has recounted the facts, and those facts remain. We cannot question those facts. But the initial reaction was that, contrary to what international non-governmental organizations and national non-governmental organizations were saying, that the military were involved, the government said the military was not involved. That is the key element of disagreement between the two reports. Numbers are still in question, because the current report does not present the numbers. I know that this is not a report that the Commission submitted to the government. This is a summary of the report. The actual report itself has numbers, it has names, it has families, it has locations, and that report is longer. But the summary which has been presented clearly responsible for the killings. Now, it is true what the minister says, that the government was misled. That is true. But the issue we should focus on right now is, what is the government doing to make sure that it is never misled in such a manner that it comes out and presents false information or misrepresented information to the Cameroonian people? And that is where I talk about handling the perpetrators in strict compliance with the law and the legal procedure, and sending a clear message to the law enforcement community in Cameroon that the government will not tolerate misrepresentation of facts, no matter how minute those facts are. Babylon, you would agree with me that several of such reports were supposed to have been written before Cameroon. This is not the first time in which Cameroonians have been killed in good number. What happened to all those other incidents? Did the government just accept the report of the officer at the scene and shut it down and said, okay, it's done? Does the government, or at this point, that the government knows that officials are misrepresenting reports, is the government ready to go back and investigate some of the instances and incidences that have occurred, and the government simply accepted the statement of the officer at the scene as total truth and nothing but the truth? Now, if the government takes such action of investigating or re-investigating some of the previous killings, then the government will be telling the Cameroon people, we are open to transparency, especially its actions of our law enforcement. And like I said at the very beginning of this topic, professionalism and integrity are core values for every individual in the law enforcement community. The minister said the government presented the information in good faith. Of course, the government presented it in good faith because the government trusted the officer that is at the scene of the incident. When the government now finds out that the officers at the scene of incident, the officers provide reports about what is going on the field, it's sometimes these officers are sometimes misrepresenting facts, then it is incumbent on the government to change the rules of operation. It is incumbent on the government to now say, we are going to set up a structure which guarantees that officers are not misrepresenting information about what they do to the citizens of the nation.
Some social critics think that the government is simply doing what it calls scapegoating some elements of the National Armed Forces to hide its failures, and some politicians like Professor Maurice Kamto are calling for an international independent investigation into the matter. Dr. Oscar Laban, before we go, your last word on government's strategy, the military strategy being deployed in the northwest and southwest regions of the country to solve the crisis. Where is the way out? Is that the right way? In some few seconds.
I think the investigation has been done. If we call for further investigation into Gabu, then we are saying we do not trust the bishops that participated in that commission. We do not trust the religious leaders that were brought in. We do not trust the non-governmental organizations that were brought in by the government team to work on that. So, what we should focus on is what the government has said. The victims, what is going to be the fate of the victims? Government has said what is going to be done. What is going to be done about that? Now, can we follow up to make sure that the victims receive the area that is afforded to them? Can we make sure that the survivors receive the right compensation at the right time, in the right amount?
All right, Dr. Oscar, we are caught up by time. You are working with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and you are the president of the foundation, the Labang Foundation, a non-governmental organization working with IDPs in the northwest and southwest and even the northern regions of the country and promoting education in Cameroon. Thanks for joining us in this edition of The Insight.
Equinoxe Télévision, au-delà de l'image.